So today, our guest is Heather Tucker. She is a certified Christian sex coach. She helps women overcome religious sexual shame, release their sexy confidence, female sexuality, and empowerment into their lives and relationships. She's a two-time best-selling author with her books, Damn, Your Weight Loss Plateaus. That helps women get their sexy back after having kids. And Why Doesn't My Husband Want Me? That helps couples avoid and overcome a sexless marriage. Heather has been married to her husband Chuck for 21 years, during which she overcame a 12-year sexless marriage, is a mom of 3 boys, first-time grandma to 1 grandson. So excited to have Heather with us here today. Great. Now that we know who our beautiful Heather is, welcome Heather to the Black Swan Life podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. I saw your Instagram and I was like, I need to have this woman on my podcast. I need to have her in my life. I need to have her in my world, because your work is so pivotal. And I love, like I was saying to you before we started recording, I love your authenticity. I love how you make sexuality so normal. So, and I'm sure you offend some people, I'm sure, but I just absolutely love everything about how you represent sexuality, especially for Christian women. But as I was reading your bio, obviously I know everybody wants to know this piece about a 21-year marriage. That's a long time to be married, but then 12 years of no sex. Tell us about that, please, Heather, before we start bombarding you with questions. Tell me more about it.
Yes, of course. Well, my husband and I, when we first got together, I had come out of a broken relationship. So I was married before for a couple of years, and my 2 older kids are from that marriage. Very, very abusive marriage. So when I met my husband, I was very broken, very abused, and didn't trust men. And so he had a lot of work that he needed to do with me to get me to trust him. And that took many years. But the love that I felt from him was very real. From day one, he showed me what it actually looked like to be in love and to actually know what it felt like to be treated with respect, to be treated with honor, to be treated as a woman, to encourage my femininity to come out. And I never had that before. And so our relationship started very beautiful. He was my knight, in shining armor. And I really do feel like he rescued me from a very painful existence. And so we had a lot of sex in the beginning. It was crazy awesome. I never had felt connected to someone's soul like I did. Very different type of sex when you are in love and you can feel into each other's soul. Very, very, very different. And so we decided to go on this journey of having our own baby. I saw how amazing he was with my kids. By this time, he had adopted my 2 older boys, so they were all Tuckers. And we went on this journey, but we had 2 very horrible, traumatic miscarriages. Both of them were at 5 months. And so I was showing one, I was about to go in and find out the sex of the baby. It was just very, very, very difficult and painful. So when we finally got pregnant with our youngest, who's now 18, Joshua, I was like sick and I was in and out of the hospital. I mean, it was just this horrible pregnancy. So by the time I was released to have sex again after we had him at 6 weeks postpartum, I was like ready. Like I was ready to get back to that connection, that the sex, because we couldn't actually have sex during the pregnancy either. They wanted to make sure that it wasn't like the sex that was causing the miscarriages. And so there was no sex during the pregnancy. So when the doctor's like, go for it, Heather, I was like, yay. And so I got myself all dolled up and I came down the stairs and I was wearing the really cute lingerie piece and my hair was all cute and my lashes were on, like the whole thing. And I went to approach my husband in the same way that always worked before, which was climbing on top of him because he loves me on top. And I started to kiss him and caress him and touch him and all the things that worked before that he loved. But for some reason, he did not want to have sex. He actually took my body and he picked me up off of him and put me off to the side and then just like put me down. And he said, no, I'm not in the mood. And I was like, what just happened? Because he's never said no to me ever before. And so of course I was very confused and I said, what, what's happening? And he just said he wasn't in the mood. So I was like, okay, whatever, I'll come back on a different date, which I did. Like a couple of days later, same thing. He did not want to have sex with me. So by this time, my feelings, of course, were getting hurt. And that started the 12 years of no sex. Now, we did kiss, not like French kiss, but like we would peck and we would kiss on the mouth, like when he would come in and out of work. And of course, we would hug. And we still had a very emotionally intimate connection with each other. We still sat on the couch next to each other, held hands. We would still snuggle in bed and all that. So I felt close. I felt like he was still romanticizing me, like he would bring me flowers and whatever. Like it was still that kind of relationship. So I could tell he loved me, but there was just no physical sex. It had been completely taken off the table.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the feeling of being rejected, do you now know why that was the case? Of course, you now know why the case. Well,
a little bit, but he's not one for sharing his feelings. He's one of those men that just is really guarded with his feelings. What we did discover through counseling, because we did go for several months to counseling, towards the end of the 12 years, I was just like, I can't see myself doing this for 40 more years if we're supposed to live until around 80. And by that time we were like early 40s. And I'm like, I can't see myself doing this. So during therapy, I did find out that his father was abusive and did not like him or his brother to share feelings or to talk about anything. He grew up feeling like he had to be silent and just stuff everything down. So I understood that part of him now because that came out in therapy. So it gave me a little more understanding and a little more grace, for him. The other thing that came out is his fear of me getting pregnant again and having to go through the miscarriages, because let's face it, he saw the pain that I was in, but he also went through the pain. And I'm sure that he didn't want to experience that, again either. But I did feel like his love for me, I started to question it because I feel more love when I'm being physical with somebody during the sexual act. And so because that was taken off of the table, I did start to question his love. I wondered if he was going outside of our relationship and getting sex from somewhere else. I did feel the feelings of rejection and abandonment. So that there was a lot of that, which of course, so even though there was no physical abuse, I do feel like during that time, it was an emotional abuse type of experience because I was just in this dark pit all the time. And like, no matter how much I shared with him how I was feeling, nothing was changing.
So how did you handle your own sexual needs? Surely that they didn't go away because he didn't want to play. So how did you manage it for 12 years, even though you didn't want it from him? What did you resort to?
Yeah. Well, I've always been a very sexual person. So I grew up in the church. And even though they said that masturbation was wrong, I still masturbated and pleased myself, even from a very young age. So I knew that I could still tap into that, part of it where I could still have orgasms and still feel like I was in tune, with my body, because I understood from a very young age how our health can actually be impacted when we don't tap into those regular orgasms. And I was in that age bracket where heart attacks could start happening and insomnia and all these other health issues. And I had done so much reading on the fact that if you have regular orgasms, that stuff is like less likely to happen. Cancer is less likely to happen, like all the health scares. So I did self-please myself. I would go and buy toys and I would hide them from Chuck. And so the sex toy shops, you know, when you buy the stuff online, it's very private. I don't know if you've ever bought anything online, but you can't tell what it is. So I hid, you know, the dildo in the closet. And I would like hide it in my Ugg boots and different places where he wouldn't like find it or whatever. And so I would use it on myself, but then I would feel really guilty afterwards. So then I would throw it away. And then I would go and buy another one because I was like missing it, you know, missing the feeling of having like a dick inside me.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Go and buy another one. And then same thing, I would use it, feel guilty, threw it away. So I did that for like years, you know. I also watched a lot of porn. And I did feel like when I was watching porn, that even though I wasn't in relationship like with those people on the video, you could actually find videos of the same people and you could watch the same people like in different videos. So it started to feel like I was having an emotional connection, even though I had no I never met them or talked to them or nothing, but it did slightly fill that hole for like a little bit. Also towards the end of our 12 years of sexlessness, I did tell my husband, like, we're either going to get counseling or like, I'm leaving you. So he knew that I was thinking about divorce. And because he still wasn't ready to have sex with me, we did have a very deep conversation about what it would look like to have an open relationship. He had someone at work that was doing that. And so he was actually the one that brought it up to me. I'd never heard of it before, but he said, hey, like maybe this would be a good solution if you go out and get sex from someone else. Can you still come back to me and still feel love for me? So his fear was don't fall out of love with me, but I can't give you what you need like in the bedroom. So let's see if, you know, you could be okay going out. So I did that for a couple of years. So that's what we did. Or I did, I should say, during that whole 12 year. Oh, and then I also, I don't know if I ever shared this with anybody, but I also during that time when we'd have like the plumber come over, or like I would see somebody that I was like, oh my God, I would flirt with them just to see if anything would come of it, but nothing actually did, like through those situations, but I did try, you know, to have sex with other people.
I love it. I love your honesty. I love your transparency. I think this is just amazing because I can hear some of my followers going, oh, but isn't she Christian though? So how did you reconcile all of this? Because obviously this is a very unusual situation and easy to judge when you're standing over there and not going through 12 years of sexlessness, of course. But I can imagine you had a lot of guilt. How did you feel guilt? Did you feel shame? And how did you manage that? How did you reconcile that, your relationship with God and everything else?
I think that one of the signs of you not walking close with the Lord is if you don't have guilt or shame. I think that if you feel totally fine with something that is in the scripture that's very obvious that you shouldn't be doing, I think that you would probably want to question your relationship with God. But for me, no, I just walked around with it. I walked around with guilt and shame for, you know, those 12 whole years. And it really was me recognizing what I was doing and having lots of conversations with God and praying like, hey, God, I know this isn't your best for us as a couple, So knowing that you don't, want divorce for us, you need to work on my husband and get him like excited to have sex with me again, because in reality, I would prefer not to watch porn. I would prefer to not have relationships with outside people. I really do want to have my husband. But in the meantime, I'm doing this to take care of me, because a lot of what I told myself before I had the open relationship is, well, at least I'm not having sex with other people.
Right.
So it was like I was justifying that,
Yeah.
that in itself made me feel like a little bit better. It didn't make me feel as like this evil person, because I was, taking care of myself through self-pleasure. And then I was like watching porn, taking care of myself. So I didn't really feel like cheating, because I felt like if it was up to me, I wouldn't be doing those things.
Right. And I love your story, because I always try to explain to people that marriage is such a, it's not something that people should just race into or just jump into, because it's not always just about you. It's about the actions of the other person, often positioning you to do things that you may not have naturally or even wanted to do. Because in this scenario, here you are. And here's the thing about marriage too, there are no guarantees, because you guys were fine in the beginning. And then at some point, something, I say this to people all the time, like, don't ever judge divorced people, because you just don't know what they've had to go through, right? Because you were obviously really trying to make it work. You definitely felt love from this man, and there was something obviously wrong. He tried to meet a need. You did your best to meet that need. 12 years goes by. What happens in the 12th year that shifts everything? What was the shift?
Yeah. Well, what I realized was that I was nagging him, and I was putting all the blame on him.
Right.
During those 12 years, I really didn't think that it was bad that I was doing that, because I was taught that if something's wrong and you want to fix it, that, with your partner, with a marriage partner, that you have conversations with them, that you let them know how you're feeling, and that you share, like, I'm depressed. I'm feeling anxious. I feel like you're out here cheating on me, and how do I really know if you're not giving it to me? And like all of these different feelings. So I talked a lot. Like, I have no problem sharing my feelings, And so, so I thought I was doing something right. But what I realized, and this came when I was reading the Bible one day, I think it's Proverbs 25 or around there. It talks about how it's better to live on a corner of a rooftop than with a nagging wife. And when I read that scripture, it was like this light bulb just went off in my head, and God showed me through that verse that is what I was doing by pushing the conversation on him and jumping down his throat every single day that he would come home from work. I would literally be like, are we gonna have sex today? What's happening? Like all the time. I mean, it's not even funny. I was very, very like bitchy about it too. And so when God showed me this verse, I realized, wow, like I have a lot of work that I need to do on myself, on how to release the blame and how to stop nagging and how to just give this thing to God, but like really give it to him. And, not say I give it and still be holding on to it, but actually give it to him and release it, and learn how to step more into faith, and learn how to step more into giving myself what I need in those moments when I feel rejection and I feel abandonment and I feel like my husband doesn't love me. So I really did learn how to tap into God's unconditional love. And I tapped into mirror work, where I could just talk to myself and I would pray over myself. And I would do all of these different strategies over myself. And slowly, as I let go of that conversation with Chuck, I started to notice that he was now coming home earlier from work, and he was looking forward to actually sitting with me and having conversations with me, because he started to see, oh, like this woman is not jumping down my throat anymore. And I don't feel like this little boy, like in trouble all the time, because that's how he felt, you know? And that created this openness, this open space in his heart to then emotionally connect with me again on like the physical, you know, type of level. And then that slowly led into non-sexual touch. So then there was more of non-sexual touch. So we started to kiss a little bit more and those types of things. And then from there, we slowly started to open ourselves up again to the actual sexual act, where we started with oral, and then we started, you know, to move into intercourse. So it was a very like slower process again, as we were both building trust, you know, back in each other. And of course, comfortability, because when you don't have sex for a long period of time, it's almost like you're a virgin again with your husband, and there's like awkwardness. So we really had to get comfortable naked in front of each other again, and just the whole thing. Like it was amazing, because when we started to have sex again, the soul fire was like, you know, back. And then the orgasms were just freaking incredible. And we started to notice that we were craving each other, and Chuck was craving me more, and he started to initiate more. So I didn't feel like it was just me wanting sex, which really, really felt good, you know, to be wanted and desired by my own husband.
I think you're incredibly brave, incredibly brave. I think a lot of women, probably including myself, would have called it a day at year 3. Year 1. I know that, you know, just being in a situation, especially as women, we spend our whole lives being the defenders of our sexuality now, and it almost gives us a sense of value. Like, you know, he wants my body, and that gives me a sense of power. It gives me a sense of value, and it's almost how I interpret a man's love for me. It's almost equivalent, you know, how we're sort of trained, like because he wants me, he loves me, and whether that's true or not, a whole different kettle of fish. But it is how we are trained to understand a man's love, is his desire for us coming towards us. And to be in a position where that is not taking place can unravel us at such deep levels. And that's what I really love about your story, because after pestering the poor man to death, because I think most of us would, you kind of had the inward journey, and that created the outward sort of freedom for him. So is that what you would recommend for a woman sitting in your shoes? Because I know somebody's listening to this and they're maybe in year 6 months in, or 2 years in, you know, maybe 20 years in. My sister was in a sexless marriage for like 10 years. But then it turns out that he was bisexual. So I would probably say gay, because bisexual would probably still want to have sex with a woman, right? But it was completely, you know, turns out after that many years. So there's always that, obviously not in your case. But what would you tell a woman who's sitting there for 5 years, 6 years, 20 years? What would be the advice from you?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we have to destigmatize this thought process that the men are always wanting sex and the woman is the one that doesn't, because that's what we hear more of. And there are more women that do say that they don't crave sex as much after kids and things like that. So because it's not talked about that the woman is the one that's craving it, when a woman gets into that situation, she feels like she's alone and she doesn't have anybody else out there that would understand. And so she will be keeping her suffering silent. So she does become a silent sufferer, which is what I was. And that I would bring it up to anybody at church to just try and get some support. They said, we don't talk about that here. So even among my very close Christian Bible study sisters, when it came to prayer time, we'd be sitting in a circle. And when it came time for me, I was like, can you guys pray for my marriage? We're not having sex. And I saw the looks on the ladies' faces like, oh, that's so sad. But no one said anything. The leader would just say, we don't talk about sex, in here. So, we understand, but that's not something. So they made me feel like they wouldn't even pray for me in that way. So it was very lonely, dark period. But I would say the first thing is that you're not alone. So just understand that you are not alone. You're not crazy. I used to think that something was like mentally wrong with me because I had such a high sex drive and my husband had, well, it seemed like zero. And I actually thought, man, if I say this out loud to anybody, they're going to put me in like the cuckoo's nest or something, because I just didn't hear about it from anybody. I never heard anyone. There was no movies, no books. There was nothing that could identify with my personal experience except me. So, please know that you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. God did put your brand of sexuality in you on purpose, just like Psalms 139, where he talks about knitting us together in our mother's womb. That includes everything about you that is sexual. So what turns you on, the things that bring you to a climax, what you love in men or women, any kind of fetish that gets you turned on, or you actually need this to happen in the bedroom for you to climax. Like all of that stuff is in you on purpose and was put there by God himself. So I just don't want you to feel like something's wrong with you. So that would be the first thing I would say. The second thing is, don't ever feel like you got to go through this alone. If you're hearing this conversation and you're in the situation right now, please reach out to me or somebody else that you're comfortable with and just share your story and see if they can help. See if what they're offering, through their program or course or one-on-one coaching or whatever, could help you. Because the last thing that you want is to feel like you're so alone and your husband doesn't even understand you. So you can't even really talk to him about it. And you don't want to go into like a depressive, dark place where you might not be able to come out of it. I have heard of several women in my situation that it was too late for them because they ended up taking their own life because they had no one to talk to. So I don't want you to have to go down that path if you can actually get some help, for yourself.
Yeah. Now, Heather, thank you so much for that. I want to just talk about the other type of woman. And I've heard this too, and I was in that other category. And thank you for bringing up the attitude of the church when it comes to sex, because I genuinely believe it is completely not helpful. I've actually never encountered a scenario in church where sex comes up and there's actually something helpful that comes up. And I've been in church pretty much all my life. Like I've been in every denomination, and I actually think and I feel and I feel very strongly about the inadequacy of the church around the sex part. I actually feel really annoyed. I am very it's something that I'm very passionate about, the inadequacy of the church around sex, because sex was given to God's children, and we seem to have outsourced it to the world. We'll let the world talk about it, but we won't talk about it. But was not supposed to be the world's, it's supposed to be ours. So anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I was kind of very much like a lot of women that I've met. who sex was dirty. I think that's a clear-cut message, pretty much. And never mind enjoying it, it's just dirty unless you've got a ring on your finger. And what I found was that when I did get married, I thought, right, I'm going to be a virgin till I get married, because I was church really young and I was a good girl. And I was like, well, I'm going to be a good girl. I'm not going to do anything. And when I get married, I'm going to have great, amazing, mind-blowing, out of this world, amazing sex, right? And I found myself married and hating every single minute of it. I think I made a career of dodging the sack.
Sorry. No, I've never heard that term before, but that is
I was like, you know, poor man. Honestly, I really feel for him. I really do. Sorry. He, bless him, was an unsuspecting 22-year-old, 21-year-old, you know, who's very, very handsome. Everybody's met my ex-husband. They're like, wow, he's a good looking man. So it wasn't anything to do with his good looks or like thereof or attractiveness. But what I personally found was that I couldn't unplug.
Right.
I couldn't unplug the sex is dirty thing. Right. And even choosing him, I chose a person that I wasn't hot for, because I didn't want to fornicate before marriage, right? So I found this to be quite prevalent amongst, you know, some women who really struggle with, I mean, throughout the whole marriage, I just couldn't get my sex drive to work. I couldn't get myself to work. So I kind of thought I was frigid until, of course, I got divorced and then I went off on another path. And I was like, oh, I work. Oh, I quite like this. But it's almost as though I had to rebel against God to find my truth and my desire, right? It's as if I had to go off the beaten path to kind of realize I'm a functioning sexual person and I'm okay with my sexuality. And that was another long, very tedious road to walk, because, you know, you end up going into areas and things that you probably never thought you would find yourself in, but that's the journey of discovery. And I think maybe the journey that the church fears the most. So it kind of creates this wall. But in your experience, have you met women who were similar to me, who come to you because, well, they just can't stand having sex with their husbands and he wants it and she just can't get herself to it? Have you encountered these sort of women, and what would you say to women like that?
Yeah. I mean, I was that woman too. So, I mean, you telling your story, that was me for a very, very long time in my teen years and boyfriend, girlfriend situations. In my first marriage, I needed the lights off and all of that. So I do feel like the purity culture that is created in the church really does put these belief systems on us without them realizing that that's what they're doing, because they think that they're honoring God by telling us to not have sex. And while that might feel true for a lot of people, there really is, I mean, I'm going to make some people mad right now, but in the Old Testament, when someone would get engaged, they lived together for a full year before they had the actual marriage ceremony. So if they're living underneath the same house, I mean, you know, they've got to be getting freaky deaky with each other. I mean, how would I just can't see it not happening, knowing human nature, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I personally, like, my main goal with what I'm doing out here, the whole reason why I became a Christian sex coach is to help the believers to understand that God created this beautiful experience of sex to really connect with our partner on a soul level. And it's what God created to be this beautiful thing. The world is, the society is what has twisted it to be like this really ugly kind of a thing. And because the church does not have a sex conversation, When there's no conversation, what does our brain do, Chengi? It's like when we are confused as humans, our brain has to come up with an answer. That's how our brains are wired, like the neurotransmitters. Like when we don't understand something, we will do everything that we can to find the answer, so that our brain can like settle, and be okay with whatever that answer is. So if there's no talk of sex in the church, of course, our brain's going to automatically think, oh, well, if there's no talk amongst believers, it must be something super dirty. And if I, have sex, I might have to, just do missionary or like lay in bed and be like this, all stiff, and just let my husband do whatever he wants to like get himself off. And there's no talk of pleasure for women. It's only talk of like, repopulating the earth and the pleasure of the man. But there's really no teaching on pleasure for women. So here we are as females. God created us as sexual beings. Most of us feel the sexual part of ourselves from a very young age. We maybe accidentally, our hand goes down there at some point, or maybe we're sleeping with a stuffed animal like me, and I had this big teddy bear and the leg accidentally rubbed up against my clit. And I was like, ooh, that felt good. So as females, we're going to have that experience, whether it's by ourselves or with, a partner. So yes, the church has done us a disservice in this area. And one of my goals is to bring the conversation into the church. Am I getting a lot of yeses yet? No. But I have gotten several yeses. And I think that the more that people see that someone like myself being invited into the church, it's not going to be this whole like pornography thing where everyone's getting naked and we're having a big orgy. It's just, let's figure out like how our body works and let's have a real adult conversation about it. And let's talk about the different parts of our body that feel pleasure and all those natural things, so that when we do go and get married, we're better prepared and we don't have that guilt or shame, and it doesn't feel dirty anymore. It actually feels like a beautiful thing.
Right.
And mentally, we're not having blocks, and emotionally, there's no blocks, and spiritually, there's no blocks. We don't feel like we're sinning against God because we want to suck our husband's, can I say, I don't even know if I can cuss on here.
Penis.
I'm going to say the D word because that's me.
Yeah. Ordinarily.
You know what I mean. But there's a lot of women that come to me that have that same situation that's happening, and it really does cause sexual dysfunction in a relationship and a marriage. And it does just take reprogramming our subconscious and getting rid of all of those programs that just don't serve us anymore, and getting back to the real scripture about what God actually says about sex versus what the church has either taught us or not taught us about sex.
I think it's a valuable service, and I can imagine that the doors will be shut in a few places.
Our relationship with God is personal. So like, maybe you can eat bacon, but I don't feel like I should eat bacon. I feel like it does something to my subconscious. It makes me not feel good about it, So how God talks about the Bible, I think that we can also, and this is my personal opinion, okay? So this is not scriptural. This is just how I feel and all the work that I've done on myself and when I've worked with other people. I truly feel like we need to bring these conversations to God himself and ask God himself, is what I'm about to do wrong for me? Is what I'm about to do going to lead me further away from you, or is it going to lead me closer into my relationship with you? Is what I'm about to do going to make my future husband uncomfortable, knowing that I had this experience? Do I need to be thinking about him, or do I need to be thinking about myself, right now? And that answer is going to be different for everybody. So I can't actually give like a blanket information answer. I just know, like for me, for instance, I had an open relationship. Now, for some Christian couples and churches, they'll be like, "Oh my God, that is so wrong. Like, how do you even feel okay with that?" Well, that was a personal decision that my husband and I came to, together. And so in my spirit, it felt right in that time. Now, after a couple of years of that, it started to not feel right. So then at that time, I decided to cut it off and come back and, just be with Chuck. So you have to look inward and see how that feels, for yourself.
It's really interesting you say that, Heather, because I know there are a lot of people going to be like, girl, but I do want to agree with you on this. I think what we have done is abdicated our responsibility to actually have conversations with God about where we are, what we're doing, what's true and real, and where we need to grow to and from. And I think it's just easier to wave scriptures about and not have to face the reality. And I remember going through what I call valley of the shadow of death. Wasn't really that dramatic, but just my own darkness, because here is this good girl that was raised in church to be a virgin until she gets married, and she's ticked every box, a sweet little sausage. And now she's divorced. That was not part of the plan. Right. And what does she do now? Yeah. How does she navigate life? Your mom now, you're not just some single girl, your mom now. And then you've got the church telling you have sinned, divorce is sinful, or whatever it is. So you're kind of cast into the outer gates of the religious world, because divorcees, they're disgusting. Yeah, all but disgusting, and you kind of feel really out there all by yourself. And that, for me at that time, it was very much a matter of survival. And I remember having to really take every encounter to the Lord. And that's the one thing I am so grateful for myself. It wasn't I've always had this sense of my relationship with God is so intimate and so personal. And I'm so grateful I had that, because I don't think I would have survived my misbehavior, if you like, if I hadn't had that approach. And I think through every one of those scenarios, I met God. I met a dimension of God. I met a dimension of grace. I met a dimension of myself. And it almost had to go through this sort of full circle to come to a place where I decided what I would be, and most people will hear this for the first time, but I've had a lot of people come to me and say, "Are you celibate?" I'm celibate. Am I celibate? And all of these things. And I say, I'm actually not celibate. I don't practice celibacy. I practice virtue. And for me, those are two very different things. I don't put myself under the yoke of anything, because I would like to say I practice honesty, but I lie sometimes, right? I would like to say that I practice, holiness, but I'm far from that most times.
You're human.
I'm human. So I always say to people, what I always am, what you will always know about me, is that I'm always working out my salvation.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Because that's ultimately what we have been tasked with. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, work out yours, not mine. I don't have to work out Heather's salvation. Thank you very much. I've got enough problems on my own. And I think having that approach, regardless of where you stand doctrinally or theologically on the matter, once you know that you've got to work yours out. And for me, I wouldn't take back those years. I wouldn't take them for a minute. I wouldn't take back the sexual encounters I had. I wouldn't take them back, because I just would not be the whole person that I am now. I wouldn't be the journey was necessary for being where I am now, and having the position that I have now, and the strength that I have now, and the health that I have now. And it's taken me a long time to heal a lot of wounds. And I'm sure you also get people who have had sexual trauma in the past.
Yeah.
How do you find, as a sex expert, that sexual abuse, especially in childhood, can affect how we are showing up in the bedroom.
Yeah, no, it affects everything, especially if the abuse came from somebody in the church, which does a lot, which is why there's a lot of little babies running around, outside of marriage. But yeah, no, there's a lot of abuse, and there's so many things that could impact how we experience sex. It could be abuse. It could be the upbringing, like, what we were taught with the purity culture. It could even be just a cultural, like there's, for instance, the Jewish religion. They're also very strict when it comes to sex. So there's a lot of different rules. Catholics, different rules. Even Buddhism, there's a lot of, different rules that can come up. So depending on how you grew up and the things that you heard, it could have been a grandparent that said, don't suck D because then you're opening up demonic forces. There's a lot of grandparents that say that, when clearly Song of Solomon, obviously she was doing that. You go and read that. But yeah, it shows up in so many different ways, which then create these blocks to our pleasure. And we're wondering why we can't fully feel sexy and why we can't fully feel confident in the bedroom. We want to, we have a desire, and we know that our husbands really want us to tap into that as well, because, they see other women on social media and different places being that confident woman, moving her body in such a way. And so now the husband's thinking, why can't my wife? I married this woman. Why can't my wife be the one that does this for me? I really want her to be able to do this for me. And he doesn't understand why, now that we're married and technically the Bible says we should be able to do whatever we want, why is she not fully unleashing herself? Why is she having such a hard time just letting her hair down and fully unlocking this sexual beast? Like they don't get it, because men have different programming than women, do. So they tend to not understand this part. But there is a lot of things that can get in the way of that pleasure. And really, it's just a matter of doing the internal healing work of where that root was established, whether it was the sexual abuse or whether it was a thought that was put on us, like good Christian girls don't wear that. So whatever the thought process is that was put on you, you have to figure out a way to dig and dig and dig and dig to go all the way back as far as you can possibly think, which does take the help of a professional like myself a lot of times, because some of these things are blocked and we can't remember. So we can work with somebody like myself to bring that out. And once you're aware of it, then you can actually tackle the healing of it so that you can then fully unleash yourself sexually. That's really the only way that you can help yourself in that way.
I love it. I think we need to have you in a boot camp. We need to invite you, and we'll have like a sexual boot camp. I think, women of, I come from a culture where when you get to puberty, you get taken away into what is a kind of sexual boot camp. Your aunties take you away to the village and they teach you how to make love and how to be in tune with your body and how to take care of a man's body and how to take care of yours. And it's all actually very traditional, but that's obviously so that, the idea is you're not practicing. The boys, you learn how to do it, you get married and practice with your husband. But I feel that the more we normalize.
Did that help? I mean, if your culture has that type of help, for the girls at a very young age, do you see that helps when you finally get married, or is there still some kind of weird like stigma kind of thing over you that you're having a hard time releasing yourself? Because now I'm curious about that.
That's a very good question. Actually, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine. She's Zimbabwean too, and we were, we're discussing how promiscuous Zimbabwean women are, apparently, and one thing I do know, whether they are promiscuous or not, I have no idea, but our comfort level with sex is probably higher than most women. I think and I think not just Zimbabwean, but in those sort of regions, sex is something that is very comfortable. We talk about it all. I talk about sex all the time, but I don't think that addresses things like trauma. I don't think that addresses things like religion, because that's another thing that kind of imposes itself over and above the culture. So I do think that many of us still have issues, but I think when it comes to confidence and performance, we can probably put on a really good show. With that being said, I missed that whole learning thing, because I was like, mother, I won't be doing that. It's just so primitive. So I missed that whole thing. So I cannot tell you firsthand, but I can definitely say, let's take religion out of it. And if that was just the culture, I'm sure that probably helps more than not having any conversations around it at all, personally.
Yeah. I wish that someone would have talked to me like that, because I feel like a lot of the questions at least would be answered, so that I wouldn't be tempted to go and like find out for myself by sleeping around.
That would help. Yeah, that would help. So did you decide to go into becoming a sex therapist coach because of your marriage, or was that something that you were always wanting to do?
No. What's really interesting is I was always comfortable talking about sex from a very young age. So I had a lot of friends, and my sister's friends came to me and asked me a lot of relationship questions, and they were always just really comfortable with me. But I never set out to actually do this work at all. Actually, every single thing that I've ever done in my life as an entrepreneur, once I left corporate America, which was back in 2000 and 10 or 11, around there. Everything that I've done as an entrepreneur has been through an experience. So I have had a hard time, and then I overcame whatever it was I overcame. And then I felt compelled to teach, because like I mentioned earlier, I don't want someone else to ever feel like they don't have support. And I don't want them to feel like no one understands them. I want them to feel their truth in their moment, but also have a way to get healed. So yes, to answer your question, because I was sexless for those 12 years, and because when I started to post on social media, and I started to make like posts specifically about sexlessness, and when I saw how many people were commenting, like I remember this one time, one of the first posts I made, this was like almost 10 years ago now. I said, I did not get married to not have sex, or something like that. And then I said, does anyone else know what I mean? And then there was like over 200 comments from so many people that were also experiencing sexlessness. And then a lot of messages on the back end that were like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. So because of that, I was like, okay, this is obviously the next thing that I need to do. It wasn't that I wanted to, because I knew that I was going to get a lot of flack from it. But I did feel a internal, spiritual led type of need. And I thought, man, if we saved our marriage, how many other marriages could I potentially make an impact in, to where they would then overcome their situation, and now their marriage could be making an impact, which then would have a positive ripple effect and hopefully spread out, to where it makes a difference, especially in the churches, where, maybe the sex conversation will just get more and more comfortable, and hopefully, sexlessness will just not even be a thing. That's what I hope down the road.
Me too. Now, Heather, we will stay here for another 2 hours if we have our way, because I've got 1,000,001 questions for you. It's like I said, you're going to have to come back. But just tell us how anyone who needs you right now can get a hold of you. But before you do that, I just want to be clear. Do you just work with married couples, or just Christians, or who are you open to working with?
I'm open to working with anybody. So on my social media, you'll see that I say married couples, but I have a lot of women that come to me that are single, whether they've never been married, they've been divorced, or they're widowed, or sometimes their husband's in jail. So there's a lot of different scenarios that I can work with. And it's not just the sexlessness piece. There's a lot that can come up that can get in the way of a really good sexual experience. So whatever it is for any of you out there, I can more than likely help. And if I'm not able to help, I do have a lot of colleagues that I can refer you to. If your situation is not something that I'm, familiar with.
Amazing. So ladies, we know where to go. We found our helper. We found our savior.
I do have a website, Chengi. If you go to sexcoachheather.com, you'll be able to book a session with me. I give the first 30 minutes away for free, just so that you can feel understood and voice, what's happening, because more than likely you don't have anyone else that feels comfortable talking about this. So the first 30 minutes is free. So you can do that through my site. You can also buy a couple of my books. I have links to my books on there. My whole sexless marriage story is in there. And I also give tips on how we overcame. There's actually, I told you guys about one thing today, but there's actually 12 things that we did. And then I put that into a book. So that's on my site. And then also, if you are having an event or a woman's empowerment thing or a retreat or a summit or whatever, and you would like me to come and speak to any of your ladies in attendance, you can also book me for a speaking engagement as well.
Fantastic. And do you want to give us the website again?
Sure. Sexcoachheather.com.
That's easy enough, sexcoachheather.com. So if you ladies want to speak to Heather, and I encourage you to do it, I actually think every single one should do it. It's important to really map out your sexuality in an environment where you are not being judged. And I'm sure what our listeners will love about you is the fact that you love Christ and that you are a Christian. And no, we don't all have to agree on doctrines and rights or wrongs, but at least we can agree on loving Jesus. And I think you're safer off with somebody who loves Jesus the way you do than maybe perhaps somebody who doesn't. So I would definitely go for that. And obviously all our listeners are not just Christian. We've got some Muslims, we've got, women from all over the world. But I love the fact that you are so open-hearted and so you've been through so much yourself, and I love that you love sex. I think that's a really healthy thing. So I definitely want as many Black Swans as possible to give Heather a call, and for goodness sake, you get 30 minutes free. I mean, everyone should be, your phones should be so busy. And I would love to have you back again. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Is there anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye, Heather?
I'm just so thankful that you had me today. So thank you guys for listening. And I hope that if anything, you're walking away feeling a little bit more comfortable talking about sex than you were before you started to listen.
Fantastic. So anyone, please feel free to leave a comment, and Heather will be happy to, I'm sure, check the comments now and again and get back to you with something smarter than I probably would. And, maybe we will have her back if you want to ask Heather anything, and we can put some questions together and have her back again for another conversation. But it's been such a blessing. It's been fantastic having a conversation with you. I knew it would be. So thank you so much, Heather, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.